Cool. Calc 1 in the summer. Yeah, that might be interesting. Got a lot of people who normally do Calc 4 in the summer, but I guess they're not offering Calc 4 this summer at Clark. Linear algebra would be good for summer. I could see that. Calc 2 with an awesome teacher. Awesome. Yeah, online is definitely challenging. All right, so any PA3 issues? It sounds like Calc 4 is not required by WSU anymore. They have a new option. Instead of taking their Calculus 3, you can take something that sounds like an advanced discrete math course. You got ingest working. Good, good. All right. Well, let's play some more with Eclipse. Still have to get ingest working. Okay. Yeah, ingest is possibly the trickiest part of the whole thing. Patching up the tree takes a little bit of work, but it's nothing fundamentally different from anything you've done so far. It's certainly easier than deleting a node from a tree, for example. So I think the kind of trickiest part in terms of new stuff is the ingest function. And once that's working, you're pretty much good to go. Haven't even started because of physics. Yeah, these things happen. So far I'm good, but I plan to get the bulk of my program done this weekend. Good, good. Yeah, it's you know, all your classes are vying for your attention and your time and your energy, and part of the challenge is figuring out how to balance all of that. Oh, fun. All right, so let's make a new Java project. I'm going to call this delete me. And if this is checked by default, uncheck that, right, and say finish. I'm on an older version of Eclipse, so it doesn't turn that on by default. So we were talking about VI editing the other day, and I don't remember where we left it on here, but the basic guide for that, just Google VWrapper, go to their SourceForge site, follow that through to their GitHub site, go down to the README and look for stable update site, which is VWrapper SourceForge net update site stable, and that's what you want to put in on this type filter text. So you can just type it in here, or you can add and type it in. But basically, put that in, and you'll get these options for adding VI capability. So if you check the VWrapper and click through and install it, you get a setup where let me just make a class. I'm just going to get some text in here to play with. Right, so you get to a setup where you can do VI type things, move around with your keys, and you know, yank and put multiple times and delete multiple lines and use slash to search for things. And so on and so forth. And there's a little toggle button up here, VWrapper. If I turn that off, that'll disable the VI emulation. Otherwise, I've got good old VI. And if you do this, you may want to turn off some key bindings, depending on what you do in VI. So we went through this yesterday in lab. And if you're using VI in Eclipse and there's key shortcuts that you're used to using that are not working right, let me know and I can help you turn those off. What's the default text editor? I call it Notepad because that's what it feels like, but I don't know what it's actually called. But if you turn it off, you know, you just kind of type and you can move around with your arrow keys. You can hold down Shift with your arrow keys to select. You can Control X to cut, and Control V to paste, and Control Home to go to the beginning, and Control N to go to the end, and all that stuff. But that's basically like Notepad functionality. Maybe there's more you can do in there, I don't know. And Control Z to undo, which is always nice. Yeah, it's also gedit. It's kind of like, and actually, you know, when we create an edit window in a GUI, it'll have the exact same functionality. It's kind of like the core, the kind of minimal set of editing capabilities that you find in a window anymore. Unfortunately, you know, most people use VI exactly the same way. It's like an inconvenient version of Notepad or gedit, and if you're doing that, you're really making life hard on yourself by staying in insert mode. But that's the default. So if you like VI, you can turn that on, and I think if you like Emacs, I think there's a way to turn on an Emacs environment also, if you're of that camp. All right, so you know, we did a hello world yesterday, and you know, I've got a Control R shortcut for running, so I don't have to go and click, and it just, you know, prints out haha. So you can customize this, right? You can set this up to you know, use whatever key bindings you want. So Control R runs for me. And you can turn on or off these various assistants that will, you know, recommend what you might be trying to type and offer to autocomplete it for you, and so on and so forth. All of this stuff, if you go under Window and down to Preferences, there's, you know, a gazillion options that you can set up, and there's so many options that they give you a option for searching for options. So that you don't have to actually know where all these things are. Because, for example, if you want to turn off auto completion, there's like 5 or 6 different areas you might look for it. You might look under Java code style or Java editor, or you might look under general editors, and so on and so forth. So the search function here is your friend, and so is Google. So, but you can customize this pretty heavily, and mostly get it to what you like. Unless you're like me and you just want a straight editor that doesn't do anything, you can't do that. It's always going to auto indent, for example. But it's mostly well behaved. All right, so we can write Java code in here, and we can do you know, all the usual stuff. And I don't know exactly what workspace I'm in. Let me see. So, let me see if I can figure this out. I'm just going to start a new workspace actually. So let me close this out. And let me switch workspace. So let's start yet another new workspace. So I will go under Files, 223 Work. Did I go to 222? Oh no, I'm doomed. Oh, Eclipse is over here. We've added a new notification system. No, thank you. We'll close that out. So let's make a new Java project. And we'll make a main. All right, so I just started a new project called main, and that has given me a directory named main, which will contain all of my work. So I've got some directory structure, but not a whole lot of stuff in there. Mostly hidden files that you don't want to mess with. Okay, these are files that are being used by Eclipse to manage the structure of your project and so on. But let's go ahead and make a GUI. So I'll make a new, and I'll do other, and I'll do window builder, and swing designer, and I'll make a new JFrame. And I'll just call that main. All right, so there's a bunch of code. And you know, we can run this and we get an empty frame popping up. So I switched workspaces, all my preferences are gone. So there's our frame that we can move around and so on, and we can close it. All right, so if I come down here into my bin directory, right, I should have a class file. And if I just run Java main, well, this is really unappetizing because it keeps popping up in my other window. But I run Java main and it pops up my GUI, right? So let's add some stuff to this. So remember, there's a source window and a design window. The source window is the Java code. The design window is the visual version of that. And we can drag and drop. So I'm going to suggest put a layout manager down. So click on absolute layout and just click inside here. Move over till it turns green. Left click, and there's information created saying that we don't want to have a window manager. We don't want something that moves our widgets around for us. We want to place them somewhere, and that's where they're going to stay. So so that's the layout of null. So let's take a button and place it over here, and let's make a text field and place it over here, and we can make this text field big if we want. And so if we run this, There's our window. All right, so from here I can also run this. I'd like to get this to stop showing up on my other desktop. So we can run that, and there's our window. But we can also go into the source directory, and we can edit our code in here if we want, right? So our button is called new button. So I can change my button name. And if I compile that, so I'm breaking Eclipse right now, right? Because now my binary files are sitting inside my source directory, right? So I'm going outside the lines here, right? This is not something you want to do if you want to continue working with this project in Eclipse. But just, you know, this is a delete me area. So just for the sake of playing with this, I can go ahead and run my main program, and my button is now called ha ha ha. All right, well, I'm going to get rid of those compiled files. And I'm going to come back in here. So when I switch over to this view, right, it's rereading the file from disk, and you know, it sees my changes. But in general, if you're inside Eclipse, you kind of want to stick to Eclipse. Okay, it's a little like Git. If you're using Git, you don't want to rename and delete and move files around outside of Git, right? If you want to remove a file, you use git rm. If you want to rename it, you use git mv. Otherwise, things potentially get confused. But this is just a way to write Java code, and this is just another way to write more Java code without having to know, you know, the properties of buttons and text fields and so on and so forth. All right, so let's look at some of these things. And most of this information in Eclipse I kind of ignore, and I think you're safe ignoring it for the most part. But for example, you know, we created a new J-frame, right? So I can click on this and it will show me a bit of a border around my J-frame. But inside my J-frame, I have something called a content pane, which is this slightly smaller rectangle. And inside the content pane, I have a button, new button, which is this button right here. And I have a text field, which is this area over here. So there's a hierarchy of objects that we're creating. And each object has a number of properties. So for example, I can change the background. Well, let's put some text in here. So I can say here's some text, right? And that appears inside my text field. So if I look at JText field, right, we can construct a JText field a number of ways. We can just do an empty constructor, or we can initialize some text to appear. We can initialize the width of the field and so on and so forth. But there's all these methods we can use, right? For example, we can use a setText method, which is actually inherited. But we can use that to specify the text that should appear in the text field. We can say get text to read the text that currently appears in the text field. But we can also do this from this window builder tool, right? So we can just change what's in the text field by typing it in here. We can change whether or not the user is allowed to edit that text. So if we make it editable, then when we run this, then we have a text field that, you know, we can type inside of. So all these widgets have properties, right? And many of these properties we can control with different methods, but we can also set them up by you know, using this properties window. And there's always a way to go to advanced properties where we can turn on, you know, things that we might not usually care about, but that we can still change. We can change the border and the background color and all kinds of things, right? And this is standard across all of these IDEs, all of these things that let you drag and drop interfaces. Do exactly the same thing, right? You can set properties. There's usually default properties, and then there's more advanced properties, and so on and so forth. And you can do a huge amount of customizing, right? So you can set up tooltips so that when you hover, a balloon pops up and tells you, you know, some information about this widget. I just clicked something and I have no idea what it does. I think it crashes Eclipse. Alright, we'll let that sort it out. Mine won't show up any components in the design page. But you do have a design tab? Okay. Did you start off with making a new J-frame? Yeah, you must have, because you have a design tab. So you might have to, I'm going to have to kill Eclipse because I clicked something and I don't know what it did. And I think I'm hung. Yeah, this should work on Mac. But you might have to go to Window and look for a palette. All right. Yeah, I think I got to kill this.
Yeah, I can see the palette.
Okay, can you drag anything from there into this middle area?
So the palette is also empty. It just is a gray window.
Oh, have you installed Swing and Window Builder?
I believe I did. I was able to like create a new window builder J-frame just like the way that you showed it.
Interesting. Maybe you can screen share right after class. And we can see if we can figure it out. If you got a few minutes. No, I still don't want to allow pop-ups. All right. So everything that you do over here creates Java code, right? So here's where we set the text in that text field by saying, you know, call the set text method. Right, so we can add more text, and if we come back to the design window, right, we've got more and more and more text. So this works pretty well. Sometimes it breaks, sometimes it gets confused and it talks about a compile error or a parse error, and it will ask if you want to retry. And sometimes you have to retry 3 or 4 times, but eventually it will figure out what's going on in here. But basically when you come to your design tab, it's interpreting what the Java code says and trying to create this visual display. And so if you make random changes in here, you can actually confuse that interpretation. But parts that you're writing for yourself, you're free to edit as you like. But parts that are created for you, you need to be a little careful with. So you'll figure these things out as you work with it. All right, so let's do some events. So when we're working with GUIs, right, we're mostly waiting for the user to do something, right? To click a button, to type something on a key, to you know, take some action. And if you look at the main program, right, so here's our public static void main. It's really just a few lines of code. And I can put something in here. Code recommenders cannot download its mobile repository index. Silently ignore future download. Yeah, okay. This is why I don't like IDEs, but after you use it for a little while, it usually calms down. So let's just print a message here which says goodbye, and let's just do a return. So if I run this, right, it said goodbye, and presumably it did a return right after that. This main method has exited, but we still have a box that we can move around, we have a button we can click, we have a thing we can type into, and our little run light is still on down here telling us that our program is still running, right, until we exit. So this is a different thing from what we've done so far, especially in C. In C, you have a main program you run. When the main program returns, your program is done. And in Java so far, we've had a main method, public static void main, and when that exits, your program is done. When we start using swing, it's a different situation. We have a main method, we start running, but when that main method exits, the program might continue to run. Now, it's not the main method that's running, it's actually a method created when we constructed this main object, which is what? It's an extension of a J-frame. And when you construct a J-frame, it creates what's called a thread. And we'll spend time later talking extensively about threads, but basically a thread is like a process. So when we say Java main, right, we start a thread, and it creates a new thread which runs our main method, but there's still this original thread which is being managed by this collection of classes called swing. And that new thread is really just kind of hanging out waiting for things to happen. Right? So what does it respond to? Well, if you click on this button, it will gray it out while the button is being clicked, and it will lighten it back up when you release the mouse button. Or if this has focus and you hit a space bar, it'll do the same thing. But if this has focus and you hit a space bar, it'll insert a space at that point and move everything over. And if you know, I'm up here and I click, other things will happen. And if I click over here, this will happen. And if I click here, everything will exit. But the code that's running is really not doing anything until an event occurs. Right? So everything that we write pretty much from here on out is going to be event-driven or event-based. And so it's kind of like writing interrupt handlers. We're going to write code that really doesn't do anything until an event occurs. And mostly what we do is we set up listeners, and we say, listen for this kind of event. And when this kind of event occurs, let me know by executing this section of code. It's a very different mindset. Everything that we usually do up to this point is very procedural. Do this, check this, do either this or that, go back up and do this again. If this is true, then come down here and do this other thing, call this function and do these things, and then return, and so on. It's all very step by step by step. Event-driven programming is a very different mindset. If you've done 270 and you remember the experiment with the 3 LEDs, blinking in sequence, and then when you hit a switch, you have to change what the sequence does. That was event-driven programming, right? In that case, we called it, writing an interrupt handler. But to write a program like a game, for example, in an event-driven way is takes some getting used to. So let's go back to the stick game, right, from 224. So we had a game where you ask the user how many sticks they want to take, and they say, I'm going to take 2, and you show the pile of sticks, and the computer decides how many sticks to take, tells the user, shows the new pile, and it goes back and forth until someone takes the last stick, right? Step by step by step. Some loops, some ifs, things like that. If we wanted to write that in an event-driven way, we might do something like this. We might have, 3 buttons and a message, pick number of sticks. And the user is supposed to take their mouse and click on one of these buttons. Well, until they do that, until they point to one of these buttons and click it, what is our program doing? Right? There's nothing for it to do. It's really just hanging out. Now, if we were doing this strictly procedurally, we would be, in a loop, which would say something like, while no button pressed. And we would just, sit there forever. Or, maybe like a while forever loop. If a button is pressed, then we're going to do some other things and maybe break out of this loop. And the problem with these things are these take CPU time. If you're continually running a while loop and an if statement to see whether a mouse button has been pressed, that means that your CPU is busy, right? It's continually executing these if statements and this looping and all of this kind of stuff. And that's expensive, right? There's so many processes running that if all of them are doing this, your CPU is going to be, busy 100% of the time. So if we did it like this, right, what would our main program do? It would go to sleep, right? The whole process goes into a different state where it's basically idle. And if you are on a Unix system, for example, and you do the top command, right, we've got 336 tasks out there. 265 sleeping processes, 2 processes running. But all of these processes over here with an S under this column, they're asleep, right? What's Zoom doing? Zoom is asleep. What's my camera doing? My camera's asleep. What's my screen recorder doing? It's asleep, right? Most of these things are asleep. A zombie process is a process that you've killed, but it hasn't died, right? That's the literal definition. Fortunately, they don't eat brains too much, but yeah, you can kill a process and it should disappear. But if it doesn't, if it's still hanging out doing things, that's called a zombie. And you'll learn all about those when you do system programming and start creating processes and managing them. All right, so yeah, totally. I don't know about Worcestershire sauce and zombies. All right, so most processes. Oh, okay. I'm way behind on South Park. Someone was telling me there's a pandemic special. So most of these processes, they're just hanging out, right? There's my process top, which is running, which is showing this display. There's my X manager, which apparently is out of control because it's taking a huge amount of time. Cool, I'll check that out. But most processes are just hanging out, so they're in this sleep state. And that's what, our stick game would do in this case. it would go to sleep. But before going to sleep, it leaves a message with the front desk, right? And says, hey, if somebody clicks the mouse and the mouse pointer is sitting here, wake me up, right? And start executing this piece of code. And if they're pointing here, wake me up and start executing this other piece of code. Or maybe, you know, if they're pointing at any of these and they click the left mouse button, wake me up and start executing this piece of code. But tell me, you know, some information about the button they were pointing at. So we're gonna change mindsets and be thinking about writing programs from the point of view of set things up and then wait for things to happen. And that's actually, it gets to be a really fun way to think about programming. And it's a little more kind of how we interact with the world, right? So we don't constantly check our phones to see if there's a text message. We put on an alert and we do our thing, but then when a message comes in, our phone makes a noise and it alerts us to go look for it. So let's tie an event to this button. So again, we can look at the documentation for a J button. And, you know, it's inheriting all these things from other classes. Including this thing called a button change listener. And we can dig into this, and from the command line, right, we could write code that will do this, but we don't want to learn about J buttons per se as much as we want to get into using these kinds of interactions to do other things. So I can right click on this and I can say add an event handler, and these are all the different types of event handlers I can add. So there's some that are actions, action performed, which for a button is probably clicking. I can say change if the state changes, so if it's pressed or unpressed. I can add an event for when it gains or loses focus. Focus means, you know, if I type on my keyboard, where are those keystrokes going to go? I can change, I can specify what happens if you're pointing to the button and you press a key, or you release a key, or you type a key, which means you press and release it. I can change what happens if you mouse click, if the mouse enters or exits the button, if the mouse moves when it's in the button, and so on and so forth. Yeah, this is where they appear. So for buttons, there's a really quick way to set up methods, which is just to double click on it. And it will go ahead and add, in this case, an action listener for the type of action that we call action performed. Because a button really does one action, and that is, you know, being clicked. So let's put something in here which just says click. And so we can run that. And every time I click the button, it says click. Yeah, South Park was kind of offensive to everyone in every way, which is kind of equitable. All right, so if we want some other methods, so let's add an event handler for mouse, and let's add something for mouse entered. So I'm just going to click on this, and again, it's going to create some code, right? So now it's added a mouse listener, and it's creating a method called mouse entered. And if I come in here, let's add another message here. Which just says I'm inside mouse entered. So without clicking, if I just move my pointer over my button, I get a message saying I'm inside mouse entered. Now I can still click it, and I can get the click message, right? But I can also respond to the event of simply hovering over the mouse. Hovering over the button. And so you can do almost anything that you want, right? You can control these objects, right, by calling methods. So I could do something like this. Inside mouse entered. So my J button is called button new button. And I could change the text to say, I see you, right, when you hover over it. And so there's our button, and if I move the mouse over it, it changes the text. And, you know, I could set an event for when I exit, and I could change it back to something else, and so on. So complete control over this environment, right? Depending on what you're trying to do, tons of possibilities. So this edit box is called text here is some. Not the best name for a text box, so, you know. Let me change the name to text window. Alright, well if I come back here to my source code, all of the things that used to have that weird name are now named text window. And so I could change my click button to say something like, you know, I'll change my text field to be something inside my text window when I click. And so now when I click this, my text over here should change. Alright, so these are building blocks. But it's pretty worthwhile to just kind of play around with this, right? Make a frame, start dropping some things. And now we're just playing with a button, and we just started playing with the text field. But you know, all of these objects have, all these classes have different things that they do. Labels are basically output boxes, so you can display some information, but they're usually not editable. And it's usually just kind of a one-liner, so you could put, you know, labels on top of buttons and so on and so forth. You can have checkboxes, and you can have different actions around this. So action performed would be checking or unchecking the box. And what is J-tree? I don't know J-trees. Oh, it's one of these things. So it gives you like a drop-down view. That's pretty cool. The other thing is, so let's go ahead and let's add an event handler for mouse motion, for mouse moved. So inside our text field, hey, there we go. So like I say, save your stuff often. Nope, still don't want to allow pop-ups. All right, so let's add an event handler for mouse moved without crashing this time. So we can print out a message here, but when the mouse moved method gets called in response to mouse motion, it's passed an object, which is called E, and it's an object of type mouse event. And so let's print out, not just that the mouse moved, but let's print out the value of this object E. So we'll use E's toString method, and let's see what information is being displayed. And then we'll call it a week. So when I come in here, right, every time I move my mouse, it's telling me that the mouse moved. But take a look at this information that's being displayed. So I've got, apparent XY coordinates in the window, absolute XY coordinates on the screen, information about, if the mouse is moving while I have a button pressed, like if I'm holding down the shift button and moving the mouse, and information about the environment that it's in, the window that it's in, and so on and so forth. So we have the ability to pick up whatever information we want about events that are taking place. All right, so that's a high-level view. If you want to start messing with this, right, like I say, it's pretty satisfying. Just go in and start playing with it, and that can give you a heads up. So next week we'll start digging into more of this, and we'll go from there. All right. So have a good afternoon. Have a great weekend, and let me turn off my recording.